Okay, so we are here for another birth interview, and I'm really honoured to have Sally with us talking to us about her birth experiences as part of my Simply Natal, the Healing Birth Doula kind of series, where I've been talking to people about their experiences of healing birth following a more difficult or traumatic experience. So we're going to just jump straight in, Sally, and I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about you if you want to, and we're going to start with your previous birth and what that was like and what sort of place you were in before you had your second birth.
So yeah, I'm Sally. So I am a therapist. I work in mental health. And I have a son who is 4 and my second son who is just 8 months. So yeah, that's me.
So tell us about your first birth experience, what that was like.
Yeah. So Arthur was a whirlwind of a birth. I suppose I didn't really know what was going on at the time. So I was 34 weeks pregnant when I started having contractions, and at the time I didn't know that they were contractions. I'd not experienced any kind of Braxton Hicks or anything like that. The pregnancy itself had been really straightforward, hadn't had any complications or anything like that. It was quite an easy pregnancy. No sickness or anything like that, so it was fairly easy. And then so I woke up one Sunday morning in pain, sort of on and off, and I kind of just stayed in bed for a bit because it was like the early hours of the morning. And then when Brett, my husband, woke up, I said to him, well, just having a bit of discomfort, I think was how I described it. So we had breakfast and things, and then he was like, oh, I think we should ring triage and just see what they say. So we rang them, and they were like, yeah, what you're describing sounds a bit like a water infection. Come on in when you're ready and we'll just check you out. So I was like, oh, okay, cool. So we waited for our Tesco delivery. And I think we got to the hospital at about lunchtime, because I remember that Brett went down to the cafe and got a Sunday lunch while we were waiting, because we were just there for ages. So we were in triage, and they came to us eventually, and they were like, oh, your urine's fine, it's not a water infection. We'll just do some more scans and things. So I mean, that took a good few hours of midwives coming in and various people don't even know, checking me over and stuff. And then a consultant arrived and scanned me, and they were just, I don't know, I just remember everybody being a bit blasé about it. And sort of I was as well. I wasn't particularly concerned in any way because nobody else seemed to be. And they were like, oh yeah, it does look like early labour, but it might stop. It's really early. So they're like, we'll give you the steroid injection and then we'll admit you overnight and we'll just monitor. And I was like, okay, that's fine. So they did that, and then for some reason that I still don't really even know, they scanned me again. The consultant scanned me again, and she was, and just from that point on, it was like just a massive hysteria, I think.
Yeah.
So they'd given me the steroid injection, and then they did this other scan, and then they just took me away. They were like, they took me into into a room, like which I now think was like a labour room, and they were like, "Oh, this baby's coming," and I was like, "Well, hang on, we've
Not what
gone.
you were saying a minute ago.
You're in the very early stages of labour to this baby," and then they were like, "No, we've got to get the baby out right now." And because they'd left us in this room for a little bit, and me and Brett were both a bit like, "What?" And they were like, "Oh, you need to get ready for like having a baby," basically. And then all of a sudden, all these people were in, and they were like, "Right, we need to get you down to theatre." And I was like, "What do you mean you need to get me down to theatre? What, like, what?" And thank God Brett was there because Jesus Christ, I was just like, "What the hell is happening?" And Brett was like, "Hang on, just everybody stop, just stop." And so these midwives were like in our room, and he was like, "What is going on?" And they were like, "Oh, hasn't the consultant like explained to you?" And he was like, "Well, obviously not." Was like,
We don't know what's
what
happening.
the hell? So they're like, "Right, we'll go get the consultant." So she came in, and oh God, just think she was horrible. She was like, "Well, I've explained it," and we were like, "Well, you haven't." She's like, "Yeah, but we need to get this baby out." I was like, "Yeah, but why? Why? Like, what is happening?" And so then she was talking about like that my placenta had ruptured and that it was really dangerous and X, Y, and Z. So obviously then I started to freak out. And then we went to theatre, and I like I've never been a particularly like really anxious person. But I had a panic attack at that point. So they took me into theatre, and I just couldn't breathe, I couldn't get my breath, I was like sobbing, and Brett wasn't there either. And that was like the biggest thing. I was like, "Why isn't like my husband here?" And they were like, "Oh, he is." It's like, "Where is he?" And they'd sat him like behind me, like right at the edge of the room, like really far away, and I couldn't see him because obviously they'd turned me around so they could like, put the injections in and everything. So they were like, "Would you like him to come and like hold your hand?" I was like, "Yeah, please, that'd be grand." So then obviously like he came around, and they managed to like, because they couldn't get the injection in because I was just like, I couldn't keep still. I was
Is
panicking.
this the spinal block?
Yeah.
And
And they couldn't do it because I couldn't stop shaking because I was just like, "What the hell is happening?"
scary.
Yeah, it was. Because I'd gone from like, "Oh, we think it's a water infection," to, "Oh, actually, your baby's in danger. We need to get it out,"
Yeah.
without any real kind of sort of explanation or don't know. So yeah. So obviously, I had an emergency C-section, and Arthur was born, and thankfully he was relatively okay. Um, but like I never did, or well, I say I never did. I did eventually when I was pregnant the second time around, but I didn't find out if my placenta had ruptured or like if any of all of that was necessary. Like nobody ever came back to explain what had happened. And so I think that sat with me for a really long time, that like Arthur was relatively okay. I mean, we were in hospital for a while afterwards because he was quite small and didn't feed very well. But yeah, nobody explained to me kind of what happened.
How did you feel like following that experience?
I mean, I was. It was weird because I was so like. Obviously, I was really happy to have Arthur and that he was okay, and he was this little bundle of cuteness, and I loved him straight away, and that was really nice. But then obviously, like, physically, I was in loads of pain from, being so, ripped up, and I was in hospital for like just over a week, I think I was, and that's a really lonely place to be, and obviously at the time I had Arthur, you could have visitors whenever you wanted, and I was quite lucky in that we had Arthur at 8 o'clock at night, and Brett was allowed to stay. Brett stayed all night because there was only me and him in the recovery ward. There wasn't anybody else, so he just stayed with us until the next morning when they moved us to transitional care. I think I was a bit numb to it all to begin with. I was just like, I didn't expect to have this baby yet. We hadn't packed a bag. We hadn't organised anything. I had to send everybody out for like emergency clothes for him because nothing fit because he was tiny. I think I was just a bit numb to it all.
It's such a shock.
Yeah.
You weren't expecting a baby yet.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, and then like I say, we were in hospital, and transitional care was such a good ward to be on.
Yeah.
They were so nice and they were so understanding, but it's not the same as being at home with your family, is it? So yeah, and obviously, you're sharing a room with other women who've had babies early as well, who perhaps have extra complications that your baby doesn't have. It's such a weird place to be, I think. Because other than feeding, Arthur didn't have any other massive problems. And there were babies in there that did. And yeah, that felt a bit uncomfortable at times.
Did that make it feel a bit like you should just be grateful though?
Yeah. Like, my baby's okay, and as soon as he either starts to breastfeed or takes a bottle, we'll be out of here. Whereas there's some other babies who, they're going backwards and forwards between special care and transitional care, or they've got, they're having to be tube fed and things like that. And luckily Arthur never needed any of that. And yeah, we were home quite quickly, really.
And then after that, you had a couple of years with Arthur. Did you find yourself thinking about that experience, or did it kind of get just shelved away?
I think I'm very good at shelving.
Yeah.
I think the therapist in me is very good at, let's not deal with that.
Yeah.
The worst thing you can do. But I remember when I went back to work after having Arthur, I went back slightly earlier than I wanted to, because I went back to a different, like the same place but a different job. And one of the first clients I treated, she had birth trauma, and I was like, oh my god, like, why am I treating this? and that was quite tough to do. That was a really tough, those were really hard sessions to have.
Yeah. Did it prompt you to kind of delve more into your experience at that point? No, just keep it in the box and don't think about it. Because when we met and you started doing the course with me the second time, and we'll talk about how you got there in the first place, but I felt a little bit like I'd opened a Pandora's box.
You did.
And I think within 10 minutes of us starting, you were crying, and I was like, I'm not scared of people crying, and often people do, because this is what happens. We box it all up, and then we start talking about it, and it's like, all these feelings come out. And I think in some ways it made it even worse that I was talking about my positive experience of a caesarean, and it was around the same time as your experience of a caesarean.
I I don't think that made it worse. I
No.
think that was quite nice to hear that it doesn't have to be this. Because
Yeah. Oh,
like,
good.
when they took me to theatre, it was all like, this is an emergency, this is all, it was like, we need to get you there right this second, and blah, blah, blah. And I think it's nice to hear that it doesn't always have to be that way.
Yeah. So
Um,
when you were deciding to have another baby,
mhm.
did you think about it then, or was it just, let's just do this?
No, I don't think, not like consciously did I think about it. No, I think we were, both of us, both me and Brett, I think we were very much just both like, it'll be different this time, so let's not worry about it.
I mean, lots of ways that's a really positive way to approach it. But of course, we know that you still had probably a lot of stuff to work through to get to that point. Okay, we've just had a little change of scenery, and we were just talking about planning for your next pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
That was like, whether that you'd suppress some stuff, and at what point did it become apparent to you in your pregnancy that you needed to do something about this time?
Yeah. So yeah, planning for the second. Do you know what? I didn't really think about what had happened in terms of Arthur's birth, because like getting pregnant a second time wasn't that easy. So we struggled, and we had a miscarriage, and then when we got pregnant, it was just a case of, we're pregnant. So it was less. So I didn't really think about the whole birthing part. I just thought, do you know what, we're pregnant, and that's the thing we wanted. So when did I start thinking? So I suppose quite late on, to be honest. Oh no, maybe I'd always been thinking about, that I needed to do something.
But yeah, it was. I remember you getting in touch with me and saying, like,
So-
you wanted to do something pretty soon because you were approaching the time when Arthur had been born. Was it
yeah.
quite late on? You were approaching. You were not long off, maybe a month.
Well, I'm pretty certain. I think I got in touch with you just before Christmas, because Freddie was due in April. Because I think we came to the February course, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it must have been just before Christmas, and you'd suggested February or March, and I thought, oh, March is beyond the point where I had Arthur.
Yeah. So you
So
didn't
I'll
want to
do
risk it.
February.
Yeah.
And I'll be glad I did that.
And isn't that a good job? And we're going to get to that. So you came along in February, and
Mhm.
what happened then when you were learning about hypnobirthing and delving back into that experience, and I was forcing you to think about what had happened last time? What was going through your mind, and what changes happened for you?
I think you were the first person that had got me to really think about it. So obviously, like when I'd had Arthur, like obviously, like my NCT friends and things like that, like I was the first one of us to have a baby, so I didn't want to scare them all with like, oh, here's what could happen. And there were two of us, so I had my baby, and then somebody had their baby like 3 days later, but they were further along in the pregnancy, so they were pretty much at 9 months when they came to the NCT course, so they knew they weren't gonna get all the way through it probably. So it was kind of like, so I was like, oh, I've had my baby, here's baby, and they were all really shocked, and then the other girl had hers, and so you know people say, oh, was everything all right, and I just feel like, yeah, we had an emergency C-section, but everything was fine. And I'd never really talked about it in great depth, I suppose, and you were the first person, I suppose, and Brett and I had never really talked about it too much, and so you were the first person to say, okay, so what happened, what actually went on, and like got me to think about actually like the more of the details of it, I suppose.
And how that felt.
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't feel valid, does it? It doesn't feel like we're allowed to have feelings about it. Just, this is just the thing that happened, but my baby's okay.
Yeah, which is stupid because I do that for other people.
Yeah, I know. And it's funny because I knew that you were an experienced therapist. So there was part of me when I was teaching you that I was thinking, oh God, I don't want you to feel like I'm teaching you to suck eggs. You're the therapist, not me. And I think I felt quite apologetic sometimes. Like, I'm not trying to teach. I know that you know this. I know that you know this about the brain, and you know this about what trauma and this, that, and the other. But I think it's helpful sometimes when someone just reflects that back to us and says, "And this happened to you. This is your brain."
There's a difference between knowing what happens and knowing what has happened for you.
Yeah.
And so I sit there and like you say, I teach people about trauma all the time, and I help people to get over trauma, but it's like they always say, brain surgeons don't perform brain surgery on themselves.
Nope.
Somebody else has to do it. And I suppose it's the same for therapists. We can't we can do something, but we can't perform therapy on ourselves. And so I suppose, like I say, you were the first person to really get me to go, oh yeah, that was pretty bad. So
And that realization and that working through, that's the kind of first step, and then the transformation. So I think both you and Brett were a bit like, yeah, I know what you're saying, but I don't think this is really going to happen for us, like not me. And couldn't really quite believe it. I know Brett was a bit like, yep, I'm just here. I don't really.
How many times they came with an open? I was quite impressed that he because it's far beyond. He's a very logical. But actually, I think that spoke to him because what you said made logical sense in terms of this is how you give birth, and this is this is what your body needs to do to give birth. And I think that really spoke to him in terms of, oh yeah, that makes logical sense. Especially what you were saying about like giving birth somewhere where you don't feel afraid. That that really spoke to him. So
and I was probably more shocked than I'd ever been. Like, I nearly fell off my chair when you messaged me the week after. And what did you say?
Yeah, I said we were going to have a home birth. It's going to be great. I know.
Because you hadn't decided that. That was completely new. That was
We hadn't thought about birth at all. We hadn't thought about where we were going to give birth. We hadn't thought about how that was going to happen. I think we'd maybe both been avoiding it slightly. Just hadn't. And I think part of it was hadn't considered what my options were. Yeah. Because Arthur had been earlier, we'd had to go for like extra scans and appointments with the consultant and things, and they'd all been very much like, you don't have to have a C-section, but you do have to come to hospital. And nobody had really explored a home birth with us. It was very much a given, I suppose, that we were going to hospital because of all the risks.
So I lent you some books, didn't I? And you read through them, and then you came along to a home birth session with the home birth team.
Yeah.
And the decision was made, and that was the plan.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we were going to do.
And then what happened?
And then at 34 weeks pregnant, I started having contractions. So clearly, my body does not like to be pregnant for a long time. So at exactly the same stage of pregnancy as I was with Arthur, I started having contractions, and I knew they were contractions because obviously I'd I never really experienced what I would consider to be proper contractions with Arthur, but when I woke up on that Monday morning, I knew that I was in labour and that they were contractions. It was so intense. It I was like, oh, and I still planned to go to work. So I'd woke up and I was like, oh no, this is happening. And I said to Brett, I'm having contractions, and he was like, right, ring the midwife, ring her right now. I was like, well, it's 7 o'clock in the morning, so I don't think she'll be at work yet. But I was like, oh, do you know what? I'm just going to take Arthur to nursery, and then I'm going to come home, and I'm going to sit for a bit. I'm not going to rush to hospital. I was like, I'm going to sit, and I'm going to see how I feel. And he was like, are you sure? Like, yeah. So I took him to work, and I took Arthur to nursery, and I was like, right, I can stay at home until 10 o'clock. By 10 o'clock, I have to make a decision, because I've either got to go to work to a meeting, or I've got to ring and tell them that I'm not coming back to work. So yeah, I, like, every inch of me wanted to go to work just to prove that I wasn't going to have that baby. But
what was going through your head? Because you had all these home birth plans. Did you feel sad or
not at that point? I think at that point I still felt a bit optimistic that, you know, that it couldn't happen a second time, that, you know, that I couldn't be that unlucky that it would happen a second time. So yeah, I don't think at that point I'd given up on a home birth. But like, the contractions were getting worse, so I was like, okay, I have to admit that I need to go get checked out, and I need to check that this baby's okay. So yeah, so we went. So I picked Brett up and we went to hospital, and they texted me and they were like, "Yeah, you're in premature labour." I was like, no kidding. So we did the same thing again. We had the steroid injection, and they were like, right, so we'd like to admit you because we need to give you the second one in 24 hours, and we'd also like to give you some nifedipine to stop the contractions. Strangely, they didn't scan me that time round, which is odd. Anyway, it's just occurred to me that didn't happen. So they did all that, and I was fairly happy to that point. And the nifedipine, it did stop the contractions, and that was fine. And I thought, right, okay, I'll get the second steroid injection, because I didn't have that with Arthur. And I thought, I'll get that, and then, you know, we'll see where we are, and we'll go home. It's my plan. So I was still holding on to this. I'm going home.
But I mean, in a way, that kind of shows how your mindset had been changed for you to be spending that time still feeling optimistic about it all and not necessarily panicking yet.
Yeah, no, I didn't panic. I didn't panic until a bit later on. Yeah, so and the difference was that everything that was happening, Brett and I questioned everything. They must have hated me because I literally asked them everything. I was like, if you do this, will I be able to go home? Will this stop this? What effect is this going to have? You know, what's the point in you doing this? Just every time they came to take my blood pressure, I was like, do you need to? What's it going to tell you? If I don't let you do it, is it going to cause anybody any harm? Just, they must have hated me.
Well, I hope that they didn't, because essentially, you know, that's exactly what we need people, women and birthing people, to be doing, to be asking those questions. So, you know, I hope that they didn't feel animosity towards you in your rights. But you knew how important it was to ask those questions, because that hadn't happened the first time, and you hadn't had those questions answered.
And do you know what? I packed a bag this time as well. As soon as I had those contractions, I packed a bag and I took my birth plan with me. Took it with me and I showed them. I was like, this is what I need. This is what I need from you. And so yeah, and they were all quite impressed with that birth plan actually. So yeah, but so we went on like that, and every time the nifedipine wore off, my contractions started again. And bless him, Brett was like, shall we just go home? And as much as I wanted to say yes, I was like, but I am gonna have this baby. It's coming. As soon as those drugs stop, it is coming, and it is early. So I think if we'd have been further along, I would have maybe gone home, because I suppose obviously, they maybe wouldn't have kept me in if I'd have been further along. But at that point, I was still, I was only just over 34 weeks pregnant, and but the difference was it was my decision. I knew that I was staying in hospital because I knew that's what was best for me and the baby at that point. So I saw every single room in that labour unit, because every time those meds wore off, I went from the ward where everybody was to a private room, because the contractions were coming and the baby could be coming.
The sound disappeared. It's not connected to
Okay, so where was I? So every time the meds were off, they took me into a labour room, and I just went backwards and forwards like that for 3 days. And then
exhausting.
Oh God, it was, because obviously when you're on the labour ward, like there's women they're going to the toilet, they're coming back, some of them are in labour. It's just not quiet. So I'd not slept really, and not eaten properly, because like every time the contractions started again, obviously they took me into like a labour room, and so like I'd keep missing meal times. So I was really hungry as well. Okay. And then on the Wednesday night, like there was no more medication that they could give me. They were like, right, you've had every dose you can have. So I was like, right, fine. We'll just see how it goes. So then obviously when the last dose wore off, I went into labour again. So that was like in the early hours of the Thursday morning. So I rang Brett and I was like, right, I think you need to come. So he obviously had to get somebody to watch Arthur. And then he came, and you know what? It was really nice. So we were in this room they had me on continuous monitoring. And I hated it. So it got to the point where I was like, right, this hasn't changed for a really long time. Can we take it off? And they were like, well, we shouldn't really. I was like, I'm not lying here with this on anymore. I was like, either you take it off or I'm going to take it off. And they were like, well, we really recommend you keep it on. I was like, and I'll put it back on in like 20 minutes. It's like, you can check me again in 20 minutes. It's like, but I'm not lying here with this on all day, because I'd had it on since like 3:00 in the morning, and it was like, I don't know, like, God knows, it's like 7 or 8 o'clock. I was like, I've been laid here for hours. It's like, nothing's changed. Take it off. So they took it off, and I went and had a bath. And they just left us to it. We were like, we were doing the scripts that we'd done with you, and we had some music on, had a bath, and I was sat in the chair, and my water broke, which obviously I hadn't experienced with Arthur. And I was like, oh, Brett, you should probably go tell somebody that my water's broke because it's made quite a mess. And so at that point they were like, right, can we check you? Is it all right? And they were being like really, like it was all very much like, can we do this to you now? Instead of this is what we're doing. And so they checked us. And it was at that point when things started to obviously go a bit not quite how we'd all thought it was going to go, because his heart rate dropped a couple of times, and I remember that the the midwife came in the room with the consultant and with somebody else, so there were 3 of them at the foot of the bed, and they were like, right, so the baby's not coping very well, we think we need to take you to theatre. And I was like, yeah, okay. And then they looked at me, and I think they were quite shocked that I was just like, yeah, come on then, let's go. And I was like, yeah, but you're telling me that my baby's in distress, and you're telling me why, and you're telling me what's happening, and the best course of action is to get this baby out. And I was like, I know that that's right, so let's go do it.
Yeah. So it sounded quite instinctive, really. Like the decision for you was quite obvious. Like, this is what feels like the right thing to do.
I think for me, like, I was exhausted, and I thought, if I'm exhausted, then the baby's exhausted. Yeah. And if I'm so tired that I can't get this baby out, and the baby's too tired, like, we're not going to work together to make this happen.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe, you know, if we hadn't been in hospital all that time, but don't know, do you? So so at that point I was like, yeah, you know, he's in distress, and that's okay for us to go and stop that distress for him. So yeah, so I didn't have the same like panic that I mean, I was anxious that his heart rate was dropping and that he was in distress, but it wasn't the same panic that I'd had with Arthur at all. Yeah, so it was much different.
And then so you went for the emergency caesarean.
Yep.
Which is obviously the last thing that you wanted or had visualized happening.
Yeah.
But it felt very different this time.
Yeah, it did. It felt much more like it's a bit weird, but it felt much more like my decision, I suppose, because we hadn't just rushed into it. We hadn't just been told this is what needs to happen. You know, we'd had time to think about it, and we'd asked the questions, you know, and when they came to say we need to go to surgery, I didn't feel like I needed to ask, you know, why are we doing that, or what's going to happen if we don't, because it felt like that's what needed to happen. So it just felt very different.
So what went through your mind? Do you remember?
I don't know. I was so tired. I think I was relieved that we were heading towards an end point. I think obviously I'd been in hospital. You know, I'd been away from Arthur for the longest time. Like, I'd never left him for that long. So I think there was a bit of, okay, this is coming towards.
There we go. Oh, we're back again. And here's the little one in question. So we were just about to get to his actual birth and what that was like when he
Yes.
was born?
Yeah. So we went to theatre. And it was, like I say, it was different to the, don't touch anything, to the first time, because obviously I wasn't panicking, so it just felt a lot smoother, I suppose. And they were talking to me the whole way through it as well, and I'd explained to them that I didn't want his cord cut in, and I just felt like I was a bit more in control of what was going to happen when he was born. So they delayed like weighing and measuring him and everything. So I felt like I got some of the things that I'd wanted, I suppose, didn't we? So
You muted then and then came back.
Yeah, okay.
Are you muting us, Freddie? So, I think when you've planned a home birth and then you have to then tell everybody that you ended up with an emergency caesarean, that can't be an easy thing to do. And I'm sure you met with lots of people kind of going, oh, that's a shame and how disappointing. How did it feel? And what was it like saying that to people?
Well, I mean, I don't think I'd told that many people that I was going to have a home birth, because we didn't have much time between making the decision and him being born. So obviously, like, my family knew, and like some of my friends, and yeah, ironically, one of my friends had texted me while I was in the hospital, and she'd been like, "Oh, so and so from our NCT group, she had a home birth. You should talk to her." Like, I was like, yeah, I might do that, yeah. So yeah, not there wasn't loads of people that knew, I suppose, because I'd not got round to telling anyone, or it just hadn't got to that stage. But yeah, when obviously people found out that I'd had another emergency C-section, it was like that. It was like, oh, another one. But it was all right. Like, it was all right, because for me it felt different, so it didn't matter what other people's reactions were.
So did you say that to people? Did you say, actually, it was really different this time?
Yeah. So, I mean, the few people I've spoken, obviously we went into lockdown not much longer after I got out of hospital, so not really spoken to many people about it. But yeah, I think the people that I have spoken to, I think the way I speak about it is very different, as well. So,
what's been the impact for you postnatally? And I mean, we've been stuck at home here. Does it feel different for you postnatally as well?
So it was weird, because we ended up no, don't touch anything. We ended up on the same ward, so we ended up on transitional care. We ended up with some of the same people who'd like helped us with Arthur, and so when he came in to visit, like they were all like, oh, he's so big now, because obviously he was a tiny baby. So I mean, it has been different, but I don't know if that's because I felt things differently, or because it's the second child and that makes a difference, or because of lockdown and that makes a difference.
Probably just all of the above.
All of the above, yeah. So yeah, it has felt different. I mean, recovery was brutal. I think anybody who's had a C-section knows how painful that recovery can be.
And you've got a toddler as well.
A 3-year-old running around at home and no outside help because nobody can come in. That was really hard. I think if I'd have had, if it was Arthur's birth and we'd had lockdown after that, I think I probably would have really struggled how I felt, and obviously getting over his birth. But
and can you also imagine it if you hadn't have done the preparation that you've done and you hadn't thought about your options and planned the home birth and all of that?
Would have been horrendous.
And then that had happened.
Yeah, that would have been horrendous, because I think I would have just felt like, that's almost like who fails twice like that at giving birth.
And that's the thing, isn't it? So many of us, when we've had a traumatic experience, we feel like we failed.
Yeah. Whereas with Freddie's birth, it doesn't feel like I failed in any way. It feels like I very much advocated for what my baby needed.
And you did it.
And yeah, and we did it.
Oh, so lovely.
Okay, aren't you?
I think, from the outside, like you say, people just going, oh, another emergency caesarean, or people who've not done any birth preparation or hypnobirthing or anything like that before, or don't understand the benefits of home birth, they might just look at your story and go, well, there you go, look, there's no point in planning for what you want to happen, because
exactly how I felt when I came to you, wasn't it? Yeah. I wasn't going to plan anything.
Exactly. But what would you like to say in response to that now? Why are you glad that you did do that?
Because although I ended up with an emergency C-section, I still got a lot of the things that I wanted from that. So, like I say, we delayed cord sampling, we got skin to skin, we did all the things that I wouldn't have thought about if I hadn't planned. If they'd have just said, because I didn't plan with Arthur, because I hadn't reached that stage where I was thinking about birth yet. And so I didn't get any of those things. I didn't really know about delaying cutting the cord. I didn't really know about, making sure that we had skin to skin and stuff like that. And so even though I didn't technically get the birth I wanted, I still got lots of the things I did want. Sorry,
you did actually experience labour as well this time. You did actually get to use the hypnobirthing and feel in control.
Yeah. And my waters broke and they gushed like they do on the movies. So it does happen sometimes. So yeah, I think it was still really important for me to think about, in an ideal world, what do I want? Because yes, it wasn't an ideal world, but I still got some of those things. And
that's one of the things that we talked about on the course as well, hadn't we, with the Maslow's hierarchy, how we can aim for the thing, and if we don't get the thing, we can still have a really positive and empowering experience because of all of that preparation that we've put in.
Yeah,
I think that really applied to your situation.
Yeah, it really did, because I didn't get the perfect home birth, but it didn't matter in the end.
Didn't matter. Oh, I love that. That's so lovely. So if there's anybody watching this who perhaps is thinking about having another baby, or is currently pregnant and wanting to have a different experience to last time, what would you say to them?
Do hypnobirthing.
I mean, that's what I say all the time, but I'm the one selling it, so it feels a bit like,
no, genuinely, like you say, a lot of the things that you do in hypnobirthing I did already know, but I just hadn't applied to myself. So I think even if you think you know it, it's just really helpful to sit with somebody else who's a bit removed, because you prompted me to think about things that I hadn't thought about, And so I think it's really important to really know what your choices are. You know, I'd never really thought about the fact that, you know, I didn't need somebody to examine my vagina if I didn't want them to. It just never occurred to me, and so yeah, I think that's so important, is just to be able to sit with someone who can just say, well, have you thought about this?
Yeah.
You know?
And it's preparing for the next birth, but it's also working through the last birth too. It's like those things go side by side, and
Yeah,
that's what leads to it feeling like a healing journey. Like we're putting to bed the things from last time because we're replacing it with something else.
Yeah. And I think in some ways, like, it's weird to think, but I'm quite glad that the birth went the way it did, because actually it does kind of show that the same thing can happen, but it doesn't have to feel the same. And that's what it was with Fred.
Perfect.
Yeah,
well, I think it's probably getting a bit fed up now. He's like, give me some attention, Mum.
Just keeps trying to throw himself off the bed.
Well, it's been so good speaking to you about it properly, and I know we have spoken to each other since Freddie was born, but sometimes you need to do a deep dive into it. So it's really useful for me, and for I'm sure lots of other people, to be able to see that healing birth doesn't have to look the way we even planned it to look, for it to still be a healing experience.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate your time today, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's say bye-bye.